Welcome to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you choose on your terms. Today is Monday, July 22nd, 2024, and this is episode 931 of Living Free in Tennessee. And today we're going to go back to a few years ago where I talked about things going on in the world more. I talked about current events more. I talked about, well, political impacts on our culture more. And this show is being done by request of y'all, the listeners. So it's going to be an interesting day for those of you who are newer to the podcast because you've probably not heard me talk much in this regard, but it's time to have this talk. We're going to talk about preparing not for what's happening this fall, but for preparing for after the fall. And by that, I don't mean just the election in November after the autumn fall. I also mean the fall we're in the middle of right now. I think it's an important thing to start talking about if you haven't already. And I know a lot of my podcaster friends in our network talk about this all the time. So I haven't felt it necessary to do that until today when somebody said, I really want to hear your thoughts on this. So you're going to hear them for better or for worse. Before I jump into that, though, I want to do our featured event of today's show. And this is a really good event for being paired with this topic. It is the Homesteaders Jamboree in North Carolina, put on by the Homesteaders United Group. And that's Billy Bond, by the way, in case you from Permapastures Farm. It is August 29th through 31 in North Carolina. Check it out at homesteadersunited.com. It's like a whole big thing where you get there, there's food, there's activities, there's learning a lot about different homesteading activities from, raising vegetables, having healthy soils, preserving food, all sorts of stuff. Check it out, homesteadersunited.com. I also want to thank our two sponsors of today's show. The first one is agristaxadvice.com. Matthew Sursley put together a company called Agris Tax Advice where he helps you analyze what you're doing for money and then figure out the best structure for your business, how to track different expenses, any risks associated with taking advantage of tax write-offs, which are legal. And that just means that you keep more of the money you should be keeping in your pocket where it belongs. agristaxadvice.com for information on that. And he's doing a really cool webinar all about real estate. That's right. A great way to build wealth is through owning real estate. So there is a pretty cool webinar this month on that, agristaxadvice.com/webinar. Our second sponsor of today's show is Discount Mylar Bags. Toby over at Discount Mylar Bags reached out to me a long time ago, right when this podcast first started, and is like, how do I sponsor your show? And I was like, you don't yet, because I have like 80 listeners. But over the years, he's been really supportive of me. He provides the bags for Hollow Roast Coffee. And he has some resources at Discount Mylar Bags for you that do not cost money. He has some articles he's written on the right-hand side of his website if you go there and look. And it's all about how to size the bags, when to use O2 absorbers, how to use O2 absorbers, what kind of O2 absorbers to use. But he has a whole line of Mylar bags and food preservation, food storage solutions at Discount Mylar Bags. And when we talk later today about solutions, we're going to talk about being a counter option to the economy we have now by doing business with each other. This is a great way to start doing that. DiscountMylarBags.com. I have the scratchy voice today, and I'm sorry about that. You guys are getting scratchy, Nicole. I also want to welcome to our live stream Lisa, Winter Homestead, MT Knives, and Rebel Child's Homestead. Guys, if you have comments or questions as we go today, throw it into the chat area, but put the first word question in all caps, just so I know that I should be building that into the show. For this show, I'm going to mark it and respond to them at the end. And if one works in and it works out during the stream, that would be great. But what I often find happens with questions in the live stream is like 2 minutes after I said a thing, your question comes up on the thing and I've moved on to something else. Okay, now it's time for our usual segments. The first one is the live stream schedule this week. Tomorrow at 12:30 p.m. Central, I'll be doing my Tuesday live show with John Willis from Special Operations Equipment. And we have Sonny Puzikas on. And I'm pretty sure we're going to talk about the attempted assassination on Donald Trump, among many other things. So join us tomorrow for that. And then the second live stream I have this week is on Friday at 9:30 a.m. Homestead Happenings. It's going to be all about the stuff happening on the homestead, and it's been a funny week already. Like Monday has been everything that happens at once day. You guys ever get those where you're like, okay, so the firewood guy is here, and the person helping with this other thing is here, and somebody's dropping off, a plant I want to plant. And also, we need to, water line break. Yeah, it's been one of those days today. So that will definitely be covered on the Friday show, 9:30 a.m. Central Time. Next segment is Tales from the Prepper Pantry. And this is where we talk about using what you store and storing what you use and not storing stuff you don't use or don't need or don't like. It's just the same with your garden. Don't grow food you don't want to eat unless that's the only option you have. The pantry works the same way. And I was thinking about this today while I was sitting under Taj Mahal about how I have a lot less in my pantry today than I did in 2020 when I was starting to be invited to speak at events about pantry management. Isn't that funny? And part of that is in 2020, we went through this period of scarcity that really freaked some people out. And somebody was writing about this yesterday. They said, in 2020, where I lived, we couldn't get any groceries. We couldn't get meat. We couldn't get anything for 6 weeks. And then we finally started having that in the grocery stores again. And the prices were really high because they were trying to keep people from buying everything in time, right? One person buying everything, so to speak. Because at that point, people were like, holy cow, this is what it's like not to be able to get stuff. And I was largely insulated from that because I just didn't go to the store. I just had stuff here and we just ate off the stuff here like we usually do. But as a result of hearing about the scarcity at the store, I did expand the cushion in my pantry of how long I could cover for certain items, like laundry soap. Like in particular, cleaning supplies were really hard in 2020 for the whole year to get. And what has happened in the last 6 months or so is I've shrunk that window again for 2 reasons. One, I don't need to have that much of a cushion anymore because they are more available. Two, I have lots of alternatives to cover to like for things I can use that I have local easy access to that I'm using more for things like laundry detergent. So then I just don't need to buy the things. And that change really like accelerated in 2020 where I already knew I didn't want to be dependent on the just in time fulfillment of the grocery store. But it was really nice to be able to go to Aldi and buy a green pepper out of season, right? And that has changed. We mostly just eat in season here. And that means that what I store is stored outside in my yard being grown, or we do have canned goods and that sort of thing. So, what has been going on in my pantry is I'm shrinking any of the stores because I'm also like my whole cooking style has changed. And that means things I used to use in my pantry, I don't really use anymore. So now I'm like, cooking meals to use that stuff up because I do like it. I just don't use it anymore because it's not my habit. And like if I can choose between a stored herb in a jar and a fresh herb here, I will use the fresh herb or one that I dried myself rather than one I bought from the store, for example. That change has been kind of fun to watch. I also am canning tomatoes this week, and so tomato sauce and salsa. I won't have all of my salsa and sauce done, but tomatoes are for sure coming on right now. And I was at the farmer's market on Saturday, talked to one farmer who has just more tomatoes than he can keep up with. And I got his phone number. I'm going to text him after the show probably and say, hey, if on Wednesday or Thursday you end up with way too many tomatoes to deal with and they're going to get ripe really fast, let me know because I'll be happy to buy those from you as well. Because while my tomato wall is doing great, I can always use more tomatoes. I pretty much have never found a way to can too many tomatoes. I guess I could if I went out and spend lots of money on tomatoes, but based on what we grow here, I have, like this year, I ended up buying 2 jars of spaghetti sauce from the store because I ran out of tomato sauce. And that's a fail, but that's actually a win because I don't end up with too much tomato sauce in the pantry getting old. And then I didn't use them. And now I have tomatoes again, so I can make fresh sauce from the tomatoes. But that just means my goal is probably another few jars from what I canned last year. And when you can have like those good relationships with people, you can totally tap into other people's abundance that they can't keep up with. And that's how we all like tap into the value that we're creating, right? So I really like that. I'm doing a resupply run tomorrow, though. Speaking of that, getting some normal things at the store that we use. And I've been running around with my cozy list on my phone, like, oh, yeah, I keep meaning to get the adapter for my camper to a plug that's like a 110 plug because I have like the 3-prong 220 thing, but actually my camper can plug into a 20 amp breaker and not blow the breaker. So probably should get that adapter in case I ever need it. Oh, the amazing things we learn when we have campers. But I use an app called Cozy, COSI, for that because my mom can see lists, Tactical can see lists, anybody who's in my network who like we are at the store and it's like, oh, I'll buy that for that person while I'm here because then they don't have to go to the store. I love it for that purpose because then you can mark it as purchased and then I know I don't need to get that if I'm somewhere else. That works particularly well during events, but it's also really good when you have a situation like we do with the Holler neighbors where we all live next door to each other. And so, like Nighthawk might be at the store and he can pop in and be like, oh, Nicole needs this. And then he can hit me up because he never just buys it. He's always like, this one of this? That's because every time he just buys it, he gets the wrong one of this. So now he just asks every time. Such is my life. Next segment is the weekly shopping report from Joe. This is a weekly report where this person Joe has been shopping once a week and just assessing the stores in the store, the state of supplies in the store and comparing prices week over week. This is for a Tennessee location. So if you're somewhere like Pennsylvania or wherever, your mileage may vary, but I've heard from some people in New Hampshire who've told me it's really interesting to hear how much stuff is there because the prices are totally different where they are. So local pricing is a thing. Anyway, he went to Aldi and he said, we found everything we wanted. A few prices have dropped this week. Staple prices were as follows. Bread, $1.25. Eggs, $2.55. Whole milk, $2.92. Heavy cream, $5.39. Heavy cream is holding strong at $5.39 for what used to be a $2 thing. That one hurts my heart every time I read it. OJ, $3.45. Butter, $3.59. Bacon, $3.99. Potatoes, $4.49. Potato season is coming soon. That price should drop. Flour, $2.35. 80% lean ground beef is $3.79. A. Ray Pierce says, I went to Sam's last week and it looked like inventory was missing a lot of blank spots than what they were. That sometimes happens for sure. That does happen. We didn't go into Home Depot, but a price online of a 2x4x8 is $3.48. That's up from $3.25. A gallon of untainted regular gasoline remains at $3.59.9. So that is the weekly shopping report. Next up, we have the frugality tip. My frugality, and this is from Christy. My frugality tip is not a money tip, it's a time tip. Watering trees. So for those of you who have orchards or trees to water, this is actually a great tip. This is very similar to a tomato watering tip I'll share with you too. My husband and I spend way too much time watering new trees on the property, and we found some cheap 5-gallon buckets, drilled 4 holes in the bottom using his smallest drill bit. And now to water a tree, we put the bucket beside the tree on the uphill side if it's on a hill and fill the bucket and walk away. We let the bucket do the work. This allows the water to slowly drain out of the bucket into the ground to the roots where you want the water to be, and no runoff because the hose delivers the water too fast. This is a really good trick. This is great for tomatoes if you live in a place that doesn't rain like Tennessee. And what that does is we used to take number 10 cans. This is a trick from my grandpa. And you take that little can opener thing that like makes a triangle indentation and you dig it into the ground by the tomato and then you water that instead of the tomato. And then that delivers water to the roots rather than around it. And that was one way he helped like keep diseases from soil bounce back from happening, but also same thing, gets the water to the roots. And in Oregon, where he mostly grew food most of his life, the the climate is such that the rain stops in the summer and doesn't like here we're like it's pouring rain outside right now in July. That's not a normal thing in Oregon. We'll go, June, July, no rain for weeks. And so you have to water your garden unless you've figured out other ways to not have to water your garden. And that was his way of doing it for the tomatoes. So great tip from Christy. Next up, and the final segment before the main topic of today's show, Operation Independence. This is where we talk about building local ongoing revenue into our lives or avoiding the need to pay a guy so we don't have to earn money plus taxes to pay the guy so that he can pay the taxes on it after we paid the taxes on it. And yesterday I found somebody who wanted to trade lamb for beef. And by which I mean we get cow every year. We do not raise our cow. We buy the whole cow from the farm. And I actually got a cow and a half last year, which was awesome because we go through a lot of meat at my house. And that half cow I split with somebody. And I was like, I need to pay you for my other half of the cow. And I paid for all of the processing. So like we have to figure out the math. And then I mentioned I had 5 rams that we are processing in the fall. And she's like, well, I don't have any lamb meat. So we worked it out to trade lamb for beef. And then money doesn't have to go multiple places. This is just one of my favorite things about producing stuff on the homestead are things I call the homestead drug deal, where you pull up in a parking lot and I hand a pound of coffee in the window and get a dozen eggs out or something. Like we have all of these things where we're just bartering back and forth. And that's a really fun part of having a strong community of homesteaders. That's why I started the meetups at my house for the Homesteaders Alliance, which have been put on hold while my stepdad is going through hospice because I'm just not sure if I'm going to be here. But we'll get those started up again soon when things are a little bit calmer. The point of those is for us to know each other and to find ways to do things like that, right? Find ways to trade with each other to help each other out, because when we are tight as a community, we all win. Okay, with that, it's the real reason you're here. The main topic of today's show, preparing for after the fall. This one, I'm going to start out with a disclaimer I haven't had to say in years on this podcast, and that is a politics disclaimer. I'm going to talk about things today that will make some of my listeners of a particular political bent not happy with me, and they'll think I have the opposite opinion, right? This is not about my opinion. I'm not shying away from saying my opinion, but what I am doing here is observing what's going on. And in particular, I start talking about the messaging coming from the progressive left. And just because I talk about that messaging doesn't mean that I'm voting for the neocon right or that I'm pro neocon right. What I see overall in the system and why one of the reasons I stopped working in the political system is the system is the problem. Dividing us into 2 parties is a problem because they don't represent us. They represent a caricature of 2 different things that are not necessarily so. And what I know from talking to real people is that people have a lot of different opinions about a lot of different things, and they tend to relate. If they vote, they relate to right or left most of the time, because either they grew up that way or because most of the agenda on one side or the other is the agenda they want to agree with, right? But when you really dig down to the results that those different parties are getting for them, they don't serve what they really want. A lot of them haven't thought beyond the talking points about what either side says. And we are now in an election year for the president of the United States. And we are faced with 2 choices that suck, basically. And some of you aren't going to like that I said that, but I don't care. That is what it is. When I dive into this, just because I say this messaging is happening from this side or that messaging is happening from that side, critiquing it doesn't mean I'm pro or con the other. It's not a this and that thing. I'm just observing some things about marketing and communications on the uh, political side of the aisle. So there we go. That's my disclaimer. And if you don't like it, I guess you don't like my podcast, and that's okay too. Sometimes we don't like things. So let's go with this. Did you guys catch my podcast last week on, not a podcast, but the show I did Tuesday night, 9 o'clock Eastern with the Angry Prepper? How many of you were there? Out of curiosity, how many of you saw it? It was over on his channel. It was not, I didn't have a way to like also stream to my channel, or I would have happily done that. We had a discussion that's not typical for this podcast over there. And it went straight into politics. It got very political very quickly. Well, sort of political. Things that we call political now are not necessarily political, right? But when we talk about anything these days, it seems like that's political. That show was a few days after the attempted assassination of former President Trump. Hello, Life Done Free, and the Practical Gardener, and Mona and Rachel and Adam. Just saying hi to some people who I saw pop in. During that show, Angry Prepper asked me how bad I thought things were going to get between now and the election after the assassination attempt. Okay. And I knew he was going to bring up that whole topic. And I had told him before the show, like, I'm not a tactician. I'm not a military tactician. I know what I saw and what it looked like. And I know what I think it means for the election. And I know what the messaging from the progressive left and from the right is doing right after that, which is very interesting to watch. It was very, very interesting to watch. Here's the thing. I tend to look at these kind of events differently than a lot of people. And that's true of elections in general, whether it's my local fight over the bond measure to fund a criminal justice center, or who's going to be elected president of the United States. And the reason I look at these things differently is because I spent a lot of time working in public policy. And he didn't know that about me before he got me on the show. So he was like, you can hold your own in this conversation. I'm like, yeah, because I used to work in politics for like a really long time. And that focus on public policy, where my role was there, was marketing and communication. So in general, I'm pretty good at seeing through propaganda, and I'm pretty good at seeing what like the marketing impact is, or the intention behind the communications that are happening. And something I know about communications about politics is this: the PR firms and other agencies that work with candidates and work on policy issues to persuade the public, as well as other legislators and their staffs about different things, like those guys, your reporters, all of the people involved. Hey, knock it off. Sorry, there was a big old cat fight right outside my door. So I know that all of the people, the PR firms, the reporters, these guys who are reporting on the machine, communicating to the machine, trying to get things done, those people who come from different sides of the political aisle, progressive left, the very right, they also sit down and have cocktails together. They have meals, they hang out, and they talk to each other. As divided as we the people are right now in this country, as divided as we've basically allowed ourselves to become, what's interesting is the ruling elite have created that division between you and me. Probably not you and me on this podcast, right? But you and me, the broader you in your community. They want us bothered by things that divide us, but don't really impact us all that much, if you really think about it. and the people involved in furthering those agendas talk to each other, hang out, and are able to do what we're not doing. Agree to disagree on things, you know, work together on something that might be, I don't agree about this, but I do agree with you about that, so let's go. Isn't that interesting? And I think that's because people who work in those fields see through a lot of the spin and the propaganda and get less emotionally invested in what's going on. And that's an important thing. But why would the why would that be? Why do you think they're able to do that beyond the spin? I mean, if you ask my friend Sue Zoldak how she feels about affirmative action, she has a strong opinion. You should ask her that sometime. She'll talk to you. It's very interesting. But can Sue sit down with somebody who has the opposite opinion from her opinion and have a conversation? Absolutely. Can she work with a person on a different issue where you agree to make forward progress? 100%. We're letting ourselves be manipulated into destroying relationships, into obsessing on things that feel important but aren't, into making our own lives worse, trading our health, our wealth, our future for the gains of people who don't care whether you and I wake up alive tomorrow. That's what's happening. Every time you leave a family event and aren't talking to Uncle Fred anymore because Uncle Fred has such a very different opinion about LGBTQ stuff, you've just let the ruling elite win and care about that issue, and they certainly don't care about you or Uncle Fred. So stop it. It was very interesting to me that when I asked y'all what you wanted to hear about this week over on the Telegram group, that the topic that you wanted was today's topic, how to prepare for after. Because the conversation I had last week with Angry Prepper was like, what do you think's going to happen between now and the election? And I was like, less worried about that and more interested in what's going to happen after the election. But bigger than that, let's talk about what I mean by the fall. So I mean autumn for sure. I think after the Tuesday election that is the thing that happens that elects the next president for the next 4 years, there's gonna be some stuff that happens that you should think about the possibility that it could happen, and you should totally get ready for that. You've got 3 months to get ready for that, a little over 3 months, really. Um, and there's no reason not to be ready for it. It's not hard to prepare for. Anybody can prepare for it. You just have to be willing to see what has happened in former times in similar situations and what might happen this time, knowing that information, right? But I'm also talking about the fall, like the fall of our empire, the fall of the United States. And when I talk about that, we don't talk about that much on my podcast in these words, but here we go. When I talk about that, I don't mean that Darth Vader is going to land from outer space and blow up a bunch of stuff and we're going to fall. I mean that we are falling right now. We have been falling. We are going to continue to fall. You don't unfall. Like gravity is a thing. It's very hard to go against gravity if you don't have, right? So I also mean that fall. And we're looking at a world where during a campaign speech, somebody tried to shoot a presidential hopeful. And because he turned his head, he didn't die, right? Which means somebody was so compelled by whatever to take this guy down that he was willing to do that. That's violence. That's not a part of human nature that we like to encourage. As a civil society, that's not very civil. But also, you think about that, like it was a complete failure of the Secret Service to protect somebody they were supposed to protect. There's the Joe Biden problem. We have somebody in office now who is not mentally fit. And I don't know how anybody can watch the poor man speak and not see a mental decline. And, you know, if you call it out on the right, everybody's like, yeah. On the left, everybody's like, no, blah, blah, blah. He's such a great man. And we should let grandpa stay in office. Like it's this thing where you're not supposed to bring it up or talk about it in mixed company because then there's going to be a fight. Them's fighting words. Well, it's pretty obvious the dude has some decline. And as I'm sure as a result of all of the recent events, that's why he stepped down from trying to be elected. You know, when I started thinking about writing this topic, he hadn't officially stepped down, I don't think, but they had been in the marketing. So on the marketing side, Joe Biden stepped down. Like I got out of my friend's pool yesterday, drove home, and it was like somebody's like, Joe Biden stepped down. I'm like, oh, I'm shocked. I'm so surprised. I was actually a little more surprised that he endorsed Harris out of the chute, but not all that surprised. Uh, and you've got the next 3 months in the election and the risk for the future that we can learn from, leading to an election. The election's gonna happen, and guess what? Some shit's gonna go down. And yes, I'm gonna swear in this episode, but not a lot. But when I thought about how I say that sentence, that's literally how I say that sentence. Some shit's gonna go down when the election happens. I don't see a world based on the inputs I have now where some shit doesn't go down. And then after the election, no matter who gets elected, some major shit will probably go down. Right? So let's talk about that. Let's say Donald Trump gets elected. What do you think is going to be the result of that on the day that that decision is made? Now, we may end up in another situation when there's vote counting and blah, 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 and gnashing of teeth and pulling of hair until he gets elected in this scenario. So it may not be on that Tuesday, but what do you think will go down if the election is in favor of Donald Trump? Tell me in the comments. What would you expect to see happen? We've already seen Donald Trump elected once, so we have the benefit of some experience here. What did we see when he got elected the first time? And then let's talk about what, what because this is all just like look in the past. What's likely to happen knowing that that happened then, this happens now. Riots. Yes. So there was protesting and there was some violence. Riot season in full swing. I'm getting one. So A. Ray Pierce jumped ahead and answered my question. I'll ask about if the other scenario happens. But so riots are likely, but let's think about what we mean here. When Donald Trump was elected the first time, there was protests and some spiciness, right? There was some spiciness, but it wasn't like crazy spicy. But then since that time, we've been through the presidency of Donald Trump and we've been into the year of 2020 where COVID happened. And then we had the shooting thing happen. And then we had the Black Lives Matter protests that turned into riots that involved fire and a shooting and all of the things that went there. And knowing that that had escalated in 2020, what do you suppose might happen in 2024 in the fall if there's rioting? Do you think it'll be the same as before or more? I think there'll be more. And so then what decision do I make based on that? Where is the rioting most likely to happen? Rioting happens more where people are. They don't usually say, I don't like this Nicole Sauce lady. Let's have a riot in front of her house in the holler. You know why? Because logistically, that's not easy to do. What's a lot easier to do is get out and where you are, where a lot of people are, make something happen. Practical Gadgeter says, I don't expect riots in Tennessee. MAGA doesn't riot, and Tennessee doesn't tolerate leftist BS. Well, we already had somebody try to set the Capitol on fire in the Summer of Love. So I think it is a risk in anywhere where there is a heavy urban center, particularly if it's a more it's been more tolerant of riots in the past. So I'd be looking out for Nashville for sure. Even if it's not tolerated, I think it'll be tried. Memphis for sure. Not sure about Knoxville. Like we had a few protests out in the smaller cities in Tennessee, but they just were like peaceful. They were like literally people with signs, blah blah blah, right? But if you think about it's ratcheted up, it's more likely to happen, and I think it could happen in any urban center. So where do you want to be that Tuesday night? Do you want to be in the urban center? Important question. It's very easy to just not be there, and then you don't get caught up in that mess, right? Okay, let's say that Harris wins. What if Harris wins? What do you think will happen as a result of that? What if Harris wins and there's some suspicion about the validity of the vote count? You know, because every time anybody wins, we suspect the vote count. A. Ray Pierce says riots. And I think it is possible we will get protests that turn violent. I think it's actually less likely to escalate to violence quickly in a Harris wins situation. But it's still possible. And it still could get spicy. But the other thing that could happen is that the structure, the system starts targeting, longer term starts targeting people who have opinions they don't like. And it's certainly likely and certainly already happening based on what I've seen in the last 2 weeks that some of our social media giant companies will engage in censorship. And this can hurt a person's bottom line if they are using those tools to make money, to make a living, right? So there you go. Harris isn't eligible, not a natural born of citizen parents. I'm pretty sure. I mean, I don't know about that. Honestly, I haven't dug that far into her background, but I'm pretty sure they would have already screened for that. And I will say that the entire time that Obama was presidency, people tried to question if he was eligible for because of his citizenship, and it never went anywhere. Once it had been accepted by the machine that he was fine. Never went anywhere. And there was all that birth certificate talk. And a lot of people spent a lot of time talking about the birth certificate when that ship had sailed. And I'm just going to go with, I'm guessing that ship has sailed on Harris. But actually, you know what? Practical Gadgeter, I'm going to go look into that because now I'm curious. Because I've 100% not looked at it. So now but it's very unusual for somebody to declare presidency and not have figured out they can pass that MAR there. So that would be a new one. A whole new one. So I think leading up to the election, some shit's going to go down because they need some shit to go down to turn Harris into harder for Trump to defeat than Biden, but probably going to get defeated by Trump, to maybe we can turn this into a win. I don't know what that could be. I know over on the Angry Prepper channel, he was concerned about some larger, more violent interventions that could happen. Really, the thing that makes Democrats weak right now is that the economy is so bad. And if you look at what their messaging is, they're trying to use individual data points to prove that the economy is good. And I don't know that anybody's buying that, if anybody has to actually buy anything right now with the money they have. So it's sort of like falling flat, I would say. But after the election, no matter who gets elected, some major shit's probably going to go down. So there you go. But when I look at these things, I tend to dwell on the marketing, really. And something this year that I noticed that is very disturbing, that's been disturbing in the past, but much more disturbing this year, is the left progressive communications. And this is, by which I don't mean my individual friends who have left-leaning opinions. You know who you are. You listen to my podcast and we have balanced discussions about things and reasonable tones of voices, right? I mean the machine, the people who are repeating, like moveon.org, that puts out messaging and memes and jokes and stuff, and then everybody just repeats it. Those guys have like a strategic communications plan that they're pushing out. I don't think that doesn't exist on the right because it totally does, by the way. The left is better at getting their people to repeat the things, though. But the right will do it, and you'll see the right do it. And I'll be like, oh, there's one of those. So, and it's not just MoveOn.org, guys, but that's one of the ways in which messaging gets out. So, what's happened with messaging that had started happening before any of the most recent events happened um, is calling for violence before the debate debacle even happened, by the way. Calling for actual violence, like it's, like we had people attack people for wearing MAGA hats, right? Like beat them up on the street and that thing. But in general, people are like, no, you're not supposed to be violent. No, calling for actual violence in repeated like those memes that they share, those talking points that they share. Like it's actually it's okay to beat somebody up because they like Trump. 100% okay. It's okay to kill them. They're not human. And that dehumanizing type of language is very dangerous. Like not like, hey, you shouldn't be able to say what you want because you should be able to say what you want. But convincing people and persuading people that other people are less than them and not even shouldn't even be treated as humans is how we set up situations where lots of people get killed. It's not good. We already saw an effort towards that during 2020 with the COVID communications, right? Like the unvaxxed are somehow less than human, right? Well, that came out in spades before the debate, and that's coming from the machine. It's the people, a lot of the people who I see repeat them, like people I know personally who repeat that stuff because they just unthinkingly say all of the propaganda are people who have literally sat down with me, looked me in the eye, and told me they're for peace and they're anti-war and they're anti-violence. And yet there they are calling for violence. That's disturbing. That's where the mob opinion is not what the opinion of the person in the mob is necessarily, but they're lockstep, man. So directly after the debate, something very interesting happened in the progressive left communications. They became obsessed with Project 2025. Do you guys know what Project 2025 is? I didn't even know what it was, even though and then I looked into it and I'm like, oh, I totally know what this is from my background in public policy, right? I had to crack up. And by the way, guys who have been asking questions, I did get those and I have starred them and I will spend some time at the end talking about that. Um, and it was like right around the debate. People are like, "Have you checked out Project 20?" So I'm like, "Well, I'll go see this." And then I started seeing all those left things come, and there was a big messaging push and investigative journalism and hour-long shows digging into Project 2025 because um, you're gonna get trouble. Somebody says it's about 800 pages. No one has truly read it. It is 922 pages, but like the first 52 pages of it are all about like who the people are who wrote it and what organizations they're with and their credentials, and then a whole forward I skipped over. So you can start reading it for sure. 800 pages is not impossible to read, right? It is not impossible to read. I'm not going to read it in one day. That's for sure. But then I looked at who published it, and it's the Heritage Foundation. So, how this is being spun by the left, the Heritage Foundation, like the conservative think tank in DC that's been around for decades, doing the same work based on the same policy agenda the whole time. Do you know what Project 2025 is? It's that agenda in a publication. It's not like a big departure for the Heritage Foundation off of what they usually are pushing for, right? Um, but it's being spun by the left as secretive and hidden. They don't want you to know. I'm pretty sure all of the marketing and communications people at the Heritage Foundation 100% want you to hear the message that they have to. That's literally why they exist. They have guys do research and they have guys get out and get the research talked about in the news. And then they put, you know, talking points in people's hands to talk to legislators about it. They get people to fund their research. They get people to help them try to further these policy changes. That's literally how politics works. It's a policy research organization, but they are definitely coming from a perspective. And that's Project 2025. And so I see people losing their minds about it as a secretive, hidden policy agenda. Now, if I was the Heritage Foundation, I would be using all of those to raise more money for Project 2025 because look what they're doing. They're afraid of us. That means we're winning, right? That's how you get more energy behind 2025 is by doing these sorts of like exposés that are happening. Um, and the progressive left is spinning it as they've almost succeeded. It's almost a reality. It's like literally they've taken a few steps for sure. Like the Supreme Court appointments that Donald Trump put in has made some things happen. Yeah, I'm seeing it in the comments like free advertising, winning, like all of it. They and so I've started asking friends I see reposting these memes, "So did you verify that fact before you did it?" And their answer is, "I can't possibly read a 900-page document." I'm like, "Well, then why are you repeating what somebody else told you is in it? Did they read it? If nobody can possibly read it, then why are you reading it?" Right? I've also seen because I got so irritated by that. I'm like, "You do realize that you are furthering that agenda that you say you don't want to further by sharing that meme." And they're like, everybody needs to know about it and should be concerned because it's an attack on women and it's all of this stuff. I think about how many women work at the Heritage Foundation. I wonder what they think of that. Anyway, um, so I started digging into the document, which, by the way, is available for free download. You can get it for free and read it on your computer. I think you have to pay for it if you want a printed copy, but free access, just saying. I started trying to find the facts that they're spreading in the document, and I haven't been able to verify the facts. So there's spin there. Some of them are probably actually true. Like they want to get rid of the Department of Education. I haven't verified that fact, but I would guess based on what I know about Heritage Foundation's agenda that they, in fact, don't want the federal organization that is the Department of Education running education. They'd like to return that power to the states. That would be very in line with what they think. Um, so factually incorrect spin is getting thrown out there. And paired with that, because it's an attack on women and our democracy, it's totally okay to use violence to counter Project 2025. You know what all of that did from the left standpoint? It took the focus off the mental degradation of Joe Biden. That's the only reason I can think of they started pushing that 2025 thing because literally that publication under that sort of packaging that they have it has been out since I think 2023. But if you look at the agenda, it's their agenda. It's like literally their agenda. So I'm sitting and of course this is like me. I've worked in that world and I'm just like when I ask so I'm trying to be careful here. I'm like, I'm just gonna ask the question, have you verified the facts? Do you realize when you're sharing all of this that you're actually furthering that agenda from a marketing standpoint? And they argue with me, and then I'm like, well, I'm not gonna argue because it is not worth my time to argue with people on the internet. But that's surprisingly like it's things like that that make me wonder if the Democrats just want to lose this election, right? So then right after that, what happens? Somebody tries to kill Donald Trump. Yeah, he gets shot. And the messaging I see from that, I actually saw some people who I know personally say it is not okay to resort to violence. And I was like, well, that's good. Because I know you really don't like Donald Trump. Um, I see I see messages like, I'm sorry they missed him. That would have solved the problem. Wish he would have died. In other words, it's okay to use violence against Donald Trump because we know likey. And that man, just by being that man, is a threat to democracy. There were, I finally, like days later, saw a call for gun control. I was like, left people, here is your opportunity to further gun control policy. Like, it's like literally right there. Some kid, well, actually, adult kid, gets his hands on a gun that's not his from his dad's house and shoots Donald Trump. Like, nothing about common sense gun control came out on day one that I saw, right? And that's very unusual. They're like, well, we're not touching this because we don't like Donald Trump. We're kind of glad he got shot, right? Um, it shone a light on the Secret Service seemingly disregarding any calls for protecting Donald Trump. And that's going to be an interesting discussion because then that shines a light on how much the machine can adjust as itself to not do what they are chartered to do, which is very interesting, depending on which regime is in power. And I call them regimes for a reason, because whether you get one or the other, you don't get that much difference. You get just a little shift. It's just a little shift one way or the other, but you don't ever get real change. Not even when Ronald Reagan was in office did we get real change, right? And people love Ronald Reagan, but the machine is still there. The debt that he was trying to take on is like, just think about what the debt is now, right? So I think if you want to be ready, if your eyes were opened recently because of that assassination attempt and some of the other things, and you want to be ready for what happens between now and the election, it's very simple to prepare for it. Don't do stupid things in stupid places with stupid people. I'm probably getting a thumbs up right now on the video. Don't do it. And that means if you think there might be rioting, don't put your bottom near the rioting. And I learned this lesson the hard way by being in the middle of a riot before rioting was a real thing, and it was not really. It was a protest that got spicy, uh, but that was in Ferguson. I flew to Ferguson after there'd already been problems in Ferguson, and I should have canceled that trip because it's way better to look stupid for canceling a trip or maybe not make that couple of $1,000 you were going to get paid to do the thing than to land your butt in the middle of a thing like that and then legitimately get hurt or go to jail because you get accused of being involved in the rioting, which happened to some people for the January 6th thing. And you were just there. You weren't really like, you were just in the area. I know somebody who got kicked off Twitter because they were geolocated to be in DC during that and has never gotten their account back. And they were not involved in it at all. They were just there. It was very interesting. They're a spicy person though too. So that is what it is. Just to say my Gen X statement, that is what it is. So that's the first thing that's most important. And then think about what can happen in a world where stuff gets spicy like that. Well, payment systems could stop working for a little while. We know what that's like because last week when the internet broke, um, people couldn't pay for things. I actually was I had to file something with the state of Tennessee on their system, TNTAP, and could not because they weren't functional because of that. And I was like, well, this is not going to happen till Monday when things are back. And if they get mad at me for that not being done Friday, then whatever. They can be mad because I can't change it. So I had some people on the show Friday worried about, they're like, you better have cash. Okay, yeah. So for example, it'd be nice to have alternative ways to pay for some things if for a few days if you think you're going to have to weather some weird stuff. It might be good to have your tank topped off on your car, which you should always have anyway. But if it's not, then if you're on E and you have to drive somewhere and you don't have any fuel, then you can't drive somewhere if there's no way to pay for the gas coming out of the pump, for example. You may want to have some extra food so you just don't have to go places for something, right? But mostly just don't do stupid things in stupid places with stupid people and practice what we've talked about, which is having general like stability based preparedness in your life so that you're ready for the things most likely to happen, which is, a job loss, a health incident in your family, money, not having access to the system. So you have to pay a different way. need for food and all of those things that you need to cover, energy, food, water, energy, shelter, all of that. When you take a very reasoned approach to these things, if something spicy happens, being ready for what's likely to happen every day in your life, like a power outage because we have a tornado, which has happened here, um, that gets you through that. And then you don't have to worry about, is a nuke going to get dropped on a location or something. Like that's a bit, like if that were to happen, and I'm not going to, so something like that, it's not impossible that could happen, by the way. Um, if something like that were to happen though, and it was somewhere where you are not, all of those other preps are going to help you. And if you were where it was dropped, then you don't care anymore. And if you're too close to where it was dropped, then just having some iodine pills isn't what you need to survive. That's something that helps protect you, I think, from thyroid cancer, but it doesn't protect you from radiation sickness. And and so if you put all of your time and energy to preparing for that one possible outcome that's super unlikely but not impossible, then um then you haven't prepared for the things that are likely to happen, which is making sure you have access to sanitized water, you can, take care of your hygiene, energy, shelter, food. I like to have a transportation option in there if I can. I like to have ideas of where I can go if I can't be here, like those sorts of things, which are, I'm gonna call that prepping 101, which is, it overlaps with homesteading a lot, which is why we talk about preparedness here and homesteading, because I live so far out of everywhere. Um, and because I live so far out of away from everywhere, like when I need a thing, if the thing's not here, then I have to go get the thing and I have to drive really far to get the thing. It's a huge waste of time. So I just either do without the thing, I use an alternative thing, or I prepare to have the things I know that we're going to need. That is where we are at with that. So knowing that, you're already prepared for that. And if you're not prepared for that, I feel like you can think of this weekend on Saturday, figure out your plan, and in the next 3 months, be ready to, survive at home for a week if you have to, or whatever, which would be good, because if you end up with an ice storm this winter, you're going to be like, cool, Nicole, I made it through the ice storm. And if you end up with some spicy things happening in November, you're going to be, cool, Nicole, I made it through the spicy stuff without getting hurt. Right? Okay. So what about after the fall? Literally, after the autumn, we have Trump or Harris. And either way, protests, rioting, institutional abuses from social networking companies and the establishment are possible. Ooh, I wrote in Dutch. That was interesting. I'm looking at my show notes and I wrote in Dutch. I don't speak Dutch, by the way. I do speak German. I don't speak Dutch. And that'll get you through the end of the year. There's not a lot more to do there. But once that the bigger issue here is the fall. The fall in all caps, right? We are in a free fall right now. And I do the Self Reliance Festival. I've talked to Billy Bond. I was thinking actually about a conversation I had with Billy Bond a couple years ago where he was like, Nicole, I think things are going to get bad and people aren't going to get enough to eat. And I was like, possible, because if we're so reliant on just in time fulfillment and that system breaks, there's a lot of people who don't know how to feed themselves. And he's spent a lot of time figuring out how to equip people to produce their own food as a result of it. Like that's been his thing he does to help people not be one of those people who doesn't have enough food, because the more of us who are abundant and ready for times of scarcity, the more people we can help. And the more people who are not starving or hungry in a situation where things melt down, the less likely it is to get spicy in a very bad way, because a father or mother, if they see their child starving, is going to take like a hungry person is one thing, a hungry parent's something else altogether, right? So I do like to think about it in terms of not just taking care of ourselves, but realize the more abundance you create, the less issue it is when there's a bigger fall. And so we've been talking about this for years. And people are like, when the fall happens, when we melt down. I'm like, have you not noticed that we are in the fall now? We've been falling. We've been seeing some pretty impressive inflation. We've been seeing our political leaders turn into clown circus leaders. At least, 30 years ago, we could pretend to be having a balanced political debate. Now it's like you're a poopy head. Like I saw Kamala Harris's like first video out about running for election, and I'm like, oh, really? That's what you're running on? That's not very intelligent or intellectual. It's very disappointing, really. Um, by the way, don't vote for people because of their gender or their race. It's not a good policy. You should vote on them based on their you just shouldn't vote, but whatever. If you're going to vote, vote on them at least because you support what they say, and don't vote for people because you're voting against the other person. If we just stopped doing that, like things would change a lot, right? Anyway, we're in a free fall. Things are changing. The economy is changing. The way we structure our country is probably going to change. But the bigger issue is that the United States, the world power, the world economic power, is finding the end of its empire unless something big changes, and I don't think it's going to change. And I became really interested in how this happens as I was, watching CJ Kilmer from a Dangerous History podcast talk about what happens and has happened historically when large sort of like world powers go out of power, which has happened in my lifetime in the USSR, for example. I saw that one up close and personal because I was into learning German, and there was an East and a West Germany at that time. And then now there's a reunified Germany, and I was there for the fall of the wall and all that, right? Um, but he was at Self Reliance Festival a year ago talking about navigating the fall of empires. I think it was a year ago or a year and a half ago. He's going to be there in October. Not talking about that, but talking about other smart CJ things. And he started just citing things that happen in empires that are falling, like the British Empire fell, right? And when he started listing stuff, it was like increasingly old political leaders and the gender dysphoria thing and a lot of the sort of the cronyism, like accelerating inflation. He's like listing all this stuff, and we're all in the audience going, "Oh crap!" And I realized, I kind of knew it was that way already, but then as I was watching him speak, I'm like, "It's not coming. It's here. It's been here. We're in the fall. It's been going on for a while. It's just kind of slow at first, and then we get kind of used to it, and then it's like steepening and steepening." Um, and the other thing that we talked about is this isn't the only fall that the United States has had. So the United States has actually stayed a country through different iterations of itself, which is interesting as well. But the dollar is definitely losing credibility as a world currency, and that's going to be a big change when that shoe drops, because that shoe is like dropping, dropping, dropping. It hasn't gone yet, and there's going to be a moment where that happens, and I don't know when that moment will be, but I don't see how we keep that shoe from dropping. It's a very heavy shoe, and and I was thinking about that, and then of course the first thing I did this morning. I don't usually look at the news on a Monday, but I looked up at the news on a Monday because I was kind of interested to see, because I was doing the show, like what was up about Harris and all of the other things. And the first article I see is that BRICS is promoting a gold-backed currency and talking about the advantages of gold-backed currencies and all of that. And I'm watching our fiat-based currency like skyrocket out of control. The only thing that keeps us from like not having a lot more inflation than we've been having is that other countries are still using dollars, so they're all out there, and so we can print more here, and it's just sort of it's spread, and the devaluation goes not just in our country but out of our country. And then BRICS is like gold-backed currencies are the way to go. Ooh, 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 ooh. So it's happening, and the question I have for y'all is, are you doing okay though? Are you doing okay? I mean, sure, stuff's more expensive at the grocery store and housing's gone up, but basically, are you doing okay? Because I know basically I'm doing okay. I still get enough to eat. I am able to take care of the animals I have, although, boy, I just had to pay a vet. Whew, that hurt for a minute, but I'm okay. I was able to pay the vet. I'm still selling coffee at Hollow Roast. I'm still like seeing all y'all come to events, like Self Reliance Festival or the homesteading event, the jamboree that Billy's doing out for Homesteaders United. So basically, I'm okay. Are you okay? Nobody's answering, by the way, but you're going to answer eventually, and I'll see it. What I'm seeing from the audience is I have definitely seen some stuff where people are feeling stressed, but they're basically okay. A. Ray Pierce says physically, yes, mentally, nope. Okay, I'm glad you know that. Practical gardener, yes, I'm getting my woodpeckers in the column so I can retire soon. Exactly now. Winter's Homestead says it's rolling now, no stopping it. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's like a really heavy machine rolling down the thing. Um, most of the people in this audience are still okay. There have been some spikes here and there, but in general, they're okay. And I would say a lot of most of the people in the United States are still okay. They're feeling it mentally. It's hard to watch. They're worried, but at the end of the day, they're physically okay. And this fosters complacency a little bit. It makes it easier not to look at what's happening. Um, And then sometimes when you do look, it makes you really freak out because you haven't been looking. You're like, oh, but there was an assassination attempt, and holy cow, the left is calling for violence. Um, but what can you do? So if we acknowledge, if we're willing to just like today, it's like Alcoholics and Anonymous. I'm an alcoholic, right? You say that you acknowledge that thing that you can't change, so that you can move on to doing something different. Uh, if you acknowledge that the fall is happening, then you can move on to doing something different rather than fear that the fall is coming. And that mental switch is really important. Somebody asked me the other day, speaking of this, exactly the same thing. They asked me, how are you doing, Nicole? And I said, I'm so behind. And the minute the words came out of my mouth, I was like, and that's why I'm so behind. And I changed it and I said, I'm catching up. It's kind of the same with there is a fall happening. When you acknowledge the fall, you can start doing what needs to be done next. Skane's girl says, I'm okay, but I'm living out of my food pantry for the last 7 months, concerned that it may affect me in 2025. Well, hopefully you get moved to wherever you're moving long term and are able to start growing food because I know you have those skills. Angie says, I think too many are holding out for Trump to win and then life will go back to better. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that, I think. I should talk. I have some questions that relate to that, I believe, that I starred that we will totally talk about. So when I think about what can you do, that's a Gen X question to ask, right? Like I'm totally Gen X and it's like, but what can I do about it? Nothing. Okay, move on. Something. Okay, let's do something because something is often better than nothing. Although sometimes nothing is better than something. It just depends on what the something is. And also at Self Reliance Festival, Jack Spirko came. It was the event after CJ was there, I believe. And his title of his session was "Build Your Empire While Theirs Crumbles." And that sounds very selfish, like build your empire while theirs crumble. Um, and his talk was mostly about with destabilization, which is what we're experiencing, right? We've like think about how many decades we lived in a fairly stable environment, even though we had the dot-com crash and the 2008 crash. Like we're pretty stable. You could pretty much count on it might be hard to get a job, but I can find a job. And sometimes I have trouble finding a job, but here's a job. And then the jobs are in the money, and then the money gets paid. And then, like all of the things work. And now we're like, well, all of the things don't always work by gum. Um, with that comes opportunity. So opportunity when you create success is you find a problem to solve and then you solve it. With destabilization coming, you have more problems to solve. When you have more problems to solve, if you have a way to solve the problem, you're actually in a pretty good position to make money and build something better. Because the other opportunity that comes with this fall is that we can build something that is better for people, for the people, for we the people, rather than something that is better for we the elite. But the elite see this coming too, and they would much rather build something that benefits them even more. And as we mentioned earlier in the episode, they really don't care if Nicole Sauce wakes up tomorrow. Doesn't no so like, if they can tap into her value and make money off her and gain power from her, great. But if she just like pops it, whatever, she's dead. On to the next one. I'm just their battery, and the battery went dead. And then you just go from there. Well, if you think about that for a minute, this place in history is when our nation state is losing its status as a world power. And I don't know what that looks like for us long term. I don't know if there'll be a miraculous turnaround or an extension, but we may end up balkanized. We may end up staying how we are, but less world power. Um, Things have become very, very overbloated. And at some point, when you get really, really wide, you fall or you can't stand up, basically. And that may end up being a good thing for us as a country, really, because we have the opportunity to do what we tried to do, when we founded ourselves, which was be in a situation where we protect the individual. We do that without hurting other people, like this whole non-aggression principle concept, right? Where the basic human rights of the individual are important too and are part of the conversation. And if you look at how our country has developed, your basic we're actually pretty prosperous right now, and people people complain about not having their basic human rights, but we have a lot of benefit here. But at the same time, there's been a big push to move away from that and to be more about the collective good and not about empowering the individual. And that's also marketing, right? Um, but it's also very easy to say things are really bad right now, and they aren't that bad. They aren't as bad as they could be for sure. But we don't want to let them go there. And so if things are falling and things are kind of redefining, let's define prosperity rather than pain and suffering. That's just my thing, my perspective. So how do we prepare for the fall? The whole purpose of the fall. The fall. First is resist. And by which I mean A. Ray Pierce said it earlier that mentally he's not okay, but physically he's okay. We need to resist that mental thing. We need to resist the temptation to focus on all the negative, to participate in the division, and start focusing on I'm catching up. I'm catching up. And it's very hard to resist that because all of the news articles and all that stuff, it's all about, the negative. It's all about why you should be afraid. And it's scary thinking about change, and there's a lot of change right now. Like we've got accelerating technology changing how the economy has to work. Like we don't need as many workers as we have, for example. Like something's got to change. Um, so resist that, and that takes you. And a way to get that into your life is to move beyond just you and start talking to everybody who's in this chat right now. Right? Y'all come across each other and you talk here, and some of you talk on our social networks like on the Telegram group or the MeWe group, or the Facebook groups had a few more people active now. But y'all talk to each other, and some of you know each other in person. And then you're like, hey, I want to start 75 hard. Who else wants to do it? Let's be accountable. Be accountable to resist the fear of the fall, both the election fall and the fall that we're in the middle of. And from there, you can take the steps. It's easier to take the steps when you're not like watching the train hit you in the face, right? Train is coming. Maybe we need to step off the tracks. Real relationships. Having real relationships in your life has always been important, but I've observed since I was a kid in the 70s a degradation of true, trusting, real relationships that matter. And It's probably been going on longer than that. I don't know because I was born in the '70s, so I don't know what happened before I was born. But there was, when I was a kid growing up, neighbors helped each other where I lived. And we went to grandma's house for dinner, and we had meals together as a family, and we developed, like, my dad and his brother were purposeful about getting the cousins together. Like, my family had family reunions, and I know not every family's like that, right? But we developed real relationships to where we could build true community, and not just in the family, right? Like, take the time you have to learn about what real community should be, because they started using the word community for your school that's defined by geography. And somehow, I'm sorry, I'm having an audio issue. And somehow redefining community is the people you have to be with rather than the people you want to be with. It's kind of like you don't have to stay with your family if your family is abusive to you, right? Your family can be the family you choose. Hopefully you're like me, you have like a great family and you don't have to make that decision, but that decision is hard. So learn about building true community and family and what that means. And part of what that means is you control what you control. And part of what you control is your reaction to what happens, right? Because I've also seen some pretty sad feuds happen where somebody dies and then their kid realizes that their dad wasn't so bad after. That I'm watching this go down with somebody who her dad's going to die, and she will have had not spoken to him for decades because of something she perceived as a problem, that when she realizes in hindsight what she missed because she couldn't, like, talk to him and say, "Hey, this thing needs to change," and forgive him, um, she's not gonna be real happy when she realizes she lost that opportunity, and she's gonna realize it one day. It's that too, right? So it's sort of a combination of finding where, like, you don't wanna stay in an abusive situation, but also forgiveness is really important to having your community thrive. And if you think I'm talking to you, I am, whoever you is. That's one of those things I say where people are like, "You're talking to me. I need to forgive this person." I'm like, if you're saying that in your head, you probably do need to find a way to forgive them, whatever that is. Forgiveness is so important because we all make mistakes. Somebody said the other day, like, we need to be really strict with ourselves and forgiving of others. So, which it's easier to be the other way, like, well, I know what's really going on, so I need to, like, I deserve grace. Well, give other people grace because you don't know what they face that day. It's, the community thing is kind of like a school of fish, where a school of fish looks big, and if they all move together, they do better than one little fish by itself. And in the school of fish, sure, some of the fish sometimes get picked off, I'm sure. But because they have that tight community, they're better off. That's how we are too, as preppers, as survivalists, as homesteaders, as self-reliance people. We're better off with each other than by ourselves. Two, get involved in the alternative economy, whatever that means for you. Somebody just sent me a website the other day of some I think it's a Mormon group starting an alternative economy and really trying to make it, like, big and handle medical and all that other stuff. There are a lot of efforts like that under like, administration, like, they're just starting in our communities. But really, in order for any of that to succeed, you and I and everybody else has to participate in it. So tap into inner agorist and start working with each other. We have everything we need to prosper right here in this country right now. We have the skills, we have the knowledge, we have connections, we have the wealth, we have the tools. We just have to stop depending on the system for everything and start being our system. Don't depend on the system, be your own system, be our own system. And this doesn't mean you don't tap into the system for the tools that the system has, but just know That is the only way the alternative economy happens is when we start doing it. That's why when I can choose a doctor from within our network, I do, right? That's the way that is. I have some people like my family are just the kind who don't wanna team up. Yeah, then you need to choose your family. Like, I'm not biologically related to Tactical, but we're family, right? I'm not biologically related to Nighthawk, but we're family, and my family accepts them as family, you know? So, I mean, as I said, I'm lucky I have a family that's a family, but if you don't have that, then you find your family. Skane's girl knows all about that. I think you have a pretty good family, don't you? God's been well, so she actually said, "God has been taking me to task about some of my family, not just forgiving them, but going the extra mile because it's the right thing to do." Yeah, yeah. There's a reason I've been going to California. Like, it has not been good for my business to fly to California a couple times a month, guys, but they're my family and they need me right now. And that's more important than everything else. So, um, and that's the community. That's the community I'm talking about. You start getting there. But anyway, so the alternative economy is there. It's literally in the comments of this YouTube. Right there. Whenever people come like, when people come to Self-Reliance Festival, there's all these vendors, buy from those vendors, right? You'll find a vendor that makes body butters there. They're really great. Try it. If you like it, buy it. You'll find a vendor who makes soap there. No reason to buy Dove anymore if you like their soap, right? If it works for you. SOE makes really badass gear. If you want a backpack, buy it from SOE. It will last for frickin' ever. And if it doesn't, and you tell John, he he's very likely to just replace it and or fix the thing, unless it was like just abject. I don't know. I don't know what he'd do if you like poured battery acid on it. Might not last through that, but you know what I mean. Like it's it's all there. We just have to start doing it, and you do it to the extent you can, right? You don't have to do everything at once. Just do one thing. Get your financial ducks in a row. Also, if Tactical's listening to this, come into my house and figure out why I have Cat Kong in the kitchen because things are being thrown on the ground. I'm pretty sure, unless that's you. Um, Financial ducks are the one we all like to ignore because money's not something we like to talk about openly. That's part of why I added the Operation Independence because sometimes I will say, this is how much my business is making, and that's how it relates to my actual ability to pay bills. And boy, it's Tigger who's doing it. So you really want to come up here if you're listening to this. Um, and that starts by getting out of debt if you're in debt right now. And the way you do that is you stop the bleed, which means stop going further into debt and then start figuring out how to pay it off. Like I've got a friend of mine who has some debt right now who needs to bill me $400 for a work he did here that would help him get out of debt. So that's good, right? Do those things. But also evaluate what it is about your best practices that's causing you to be in debt and take control of that. And I have some shows on debt. Like if you're that person, do that, you get there, but also find ways to make your own money. You may have a job, but you can also make money. Like I have a friend who has a great job, makes lots of money at his job. He also has the skill of welding and they made $70 from me this week welding my log splitter back together. Like can you weld one log splitter on a weekend? Sure. Sure you can. If you're a welder. Um there's all sorts of ways to make money and if you start looking at your house as a source for money, it's a really good it's a really good way to build value around you and start seeing things more from a here's an opportunity, here's a problem I can solve in a way that I can make myself more prosperous, whether it's actual money or it's a trade or whatever. Like Skane's girl, not Skane's girl, the Holstein, Robin Holstein. She has a room in her house that she rents out as an Airbnb, which means somebody's in her house. And that's a way for her to make a little extra money there. Totally works. And sure, that may not be the thing you want to do, but she makes it work. That wouldn't work at my house because I got too many animals running around being cat Kong. But those things can add up over time. Like I was totally thrilled the other day when I had hip campers here on my property camping in the back and I made 80 bucks. Now, in the grand scheme of my budget and paying off debt, 80 bucks isn't a thing between like yes and no, but there have been times when it was. There have been times and there may be times again. And the fact that I have that and I have the reputation developing and we still do it and we make it pleasant for people makes a big, big difference. So get your financial ducks in a row and get serious about it. Like, look at how investment works, look at how money works, look at ways that you can create prosperity. Learn about Bitcoin and how that works. Because you know what happened when the war broke out between Russia and Ukraine? And people were stuck in Ukraine and needed to get out, and then all of the monetary stuff was shut down. I happen to know one individual got out because they knew somebody else in another country, and it was not me. So this is not me confessing something, who was able to send them Bitcoin. And they were able to get the Bitcoin, convert it into enough value to get out, and then have access to that in another country. And we're not stuck in the war zone. A money enterprise is important. Having some precious metals is important. I think having some cash on hand that sure, if the dollar totally like melts down and becomes like the Confederate money, then you don't have any money at all. But it's really good to have it when you're like, I gotta pay for a thing and the monetary system is down, like the digital monetary processing systems are down. But here we go. Here's a $20 bill. Very helpful to have that. So I mean, like the internet did break last week. Just saying. Just saying. Okay. Get out of the way. Don't be in the way of things you know are not going to go well. And that means if you're in an area that is prone to violence, then you should not stay in the area that is prone to violence. Moving to the country, gonna eat a lot of peaches. It's peach season here. I know they're probably not talking about peaches in the song, but whatever. Um, that doesn't, I don't know. Like, I have friends who are in big cities and they will stay in big cities and they love big cities, and that's fine. If you're in that situation, I would definitely have a pressure like gauge release plan. If you think things are going to heat up in that city, first of all. Secondly, I actually honestly do think you shouldn't be in the big cities right now. I think it's a bad place to be. And certainly not the best place to be during the election. But especially if you're in a city that you know is going to heat up, get out. Just be out of the way of stuff like that wherever it is. Like, um, I actually have a story under taking your security seriously, which is one of my later points that I'll tell that is also about getting out of the way, but we'll do that. Health matters. The next thing is your health matters. Not like the healthcare system matters, but your health matters. The only person that's going to make you healthy is you. I'll be doing an expert counsel segment on how to stay motivated to work out when you really don't want to and you're kind of fluffy and need to not be fluffy. Yeah, your health matters. And the thing I did that helped me the most with my health was 75 hard. Um, and it's because I also didn't drink alcohol that whole time because I have not drunk alcohol other times, but it was 75 days, no alcohol, working out twice a day. What I learned as part of doing 2 workouts a day was how to build workouts into my day no matter what happens. And that was important because that time for working out was when I was able to also mentally process things, A, and B, that was time for me. So what I was really learning during that was how to build time for me, not just like me and my health. That's what I was learning. And that's something I struggled with because I like to sacrifice my health to help other people, which is not what we should be doing, right? So your health matters. If you have health issues, do what you can to reverse them. Not all health issues are reversible, but many of them can be made, most of them, in fact, can be made better. And if you have a health issue that can't, I'm sorry. Then where you're focusing is what are you putting in place to take care of yourself for that. But health matters. And you know, I see my dad in his 80s. He's very vibrant. And he retired and he moved to a retirement community, like a senior living community, and he exercises a couple times a day, and, he's doing, like, all of this, like, flexibility class and all this stuff. As a result of moving there, he is a more vibrant person than he was before he moved there, and he just keeps saying, "I wish when I was your age, I had been this healthy because I would have even more vibrance than I did then." And when he said that, it's like the thing he told me that I didn't listen to that I should have was you should put 10% of everything you earn away and not touch it. I should have done that when I was 16 and just I'd be, independently wealthy now. But I'm listening to the health thing. And it's a good lesson, and it's something that it's very easy for us to deprioritize. And then all of the marketing for food and entertainment and all of those things is around developing unhealthy habits. It's like if you look, you're like, no, I really shouldn't eat a Twinkie or whatever. I don't even know what they advertise anymore. Like, um, I'll see like potato chips and Doritos and all that stuff. It's hard to resist, I know, when you've been programmed to like that stuff, but you can reprogram stuff yourself. And when you reprogram yourself and start feeling better, it's great. That doesn't mean that you know, I only feel good all the time because I'm taking care of my health. It just means it's a journey. And it's a journey that you can control. If you can't pick up your 72-hour bag and walk for a day, then go outside and walk for 15 minutes right now and do it again tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. And pretty soon it'll be 20 minutes and then half an hour. And then next thing you know, you will be able to pick up your bug out bag and walk for a day if you ever need it. Speaking of health and hygiene, digital hygiene matters. Last week, the internet broke. That was your early warning. We've had other early warnings when whole systems are brought down, but last week the internet broke. I got an Above phone. An Above phone arrived here today. The Above phone is separate from Google, separate from iPhone, takes everything out of those systems, puts control of my digital health in my hands. And I have no idea how to do this, guys. I'm not like a tech illiterate, but I haven't had to do a lot of coding in a long time. And I do know this. There are going to be things that are not as good on that I use on my Android that I just need to use on my Android. But they have it set up so you can like make a little room that's a jail where you put this little app that you need and it's separate from everything else so you don't have crossover. And I'm starting that journey to be able to show you how you can start taking control of your digital hygiene one thing at a time. I'm starting with my phone. That's what I'm doing. So, yeah. Angie said, "Is that the phone that Jack endorses or the one from SRF?" Above phone, I think, is going to be at SRF in October, so I'm not sure. Uh, Either of those are digital hygiene phones, though, if there was another one there. I think we did have a speaker who also sells phones last time, so that's a different phone. Same concept. And then from there, how do I de-Google my life? How do I get off of other cloud services that I don't want to be dependent on, but use them as tools if I want to use them as tools, right? But just know, it's just like I get my electricity from a line that comes to my house, and I know that at any moment a tree can fall on that line and then I have no power. And what am I going to do? So I got to be ready. There's a lot that you can do to make yourself more digitally, well, hygienic, just to use that word again, right? And part of that is password security, and part of that is not having all your eggs in one basket. I think that's a big deal. But learning how it works, even though what you'd rather be doing is making compost, I think is definitely worth doing. And learning how the AI works so you understand what you're facing, even if you're not going to use it every day, really helpful to do. Grow your own food. Next, grow your own food. I am garlic self-reliant. I will never have to buy garlic again as long as I live, unless I stop doing the thing I do, which is plant the garlic every year. Um, you literally, if you literally cannot like grow your food or really don't want to grow your food, then see item number 2, participate in the alternative economy and find people who do grow the food and tap into that. That's fine too. I think it's great to have some skills to grow your food, but not, like some people who are concentrating on being a medical practitioner just aren't into the gardening part, right? They aren't, but they can charge money for their services and they can use that money to buy from somebody local, then supports the alternative economy. And then you've solved the problem. Like figure out alternative ways to get your food. And the less you can buy from the grocery store, the better off you're going to be, because the quality of the stuff at the grocery store is not going up in this country. It's not. Every time I end up buying stuff at the grocery store, I'm like the beef at the store tastes like shit. You know why it tastes like shit? It's because I buy a cow from a guy here that's grass fed and really good. And so if I have beef from the store, I'm always disappointed. It kind of tastes a little bit like dog food smells. There's like a hint of that. Ugh. That's what happens. And then take security seriously, which is also about getting out of the way. Like if you're not in the way of the threat, then there is no threat for you, right? This weekend, or maybe it was a couple days. Yeah, it was this weekend. It was Friday. A police officer was shot and not killed in Cookeville, Tennessee. Cookeville, Tennessee is 35 miles from my house. The exit that he was shot at was, I think, 25 miles from my house. And because, so I don't obsess on the news, but because I do get information other ways, I knew it had happened when I got up at 5 in the morning on Saturday, was getting ready to go to the farmer's market. Well, as a result of the police officer being shot, 2 people ran from the scene, ditched their car closer to my house in I think it was the Baxter area, but I'm not exactly sure where they ditched it. And that meant that 2 people, one of whom was willing to shoot a police officer, was running around feeling desperate. Knowing that information, I made sure I was as ready as I could be to accidentally come across people who are desperate and might want to steal my car, etc., etc. Take your security seriously, and when there's something like that, be ready. Be ready. You should be ready anyway. But definitely in a situation like that, be ready. And then I did not go out of my way to go near the areas where they had been seen. Right? Like, I didn't choose that day to drive to Cookeville. I didn't choose that day to drive to Baxter. I was like, "This is a really good day to be in Smithville," and not be near that, right? Take security seriously, and that means your personal security, that means your digital security, that means your home security, that means learning how to do things you may not wanna do. Take Sonny Pazika's self-defense course, Escapology, right before Self-Reliance Festival in October. That'd be a really good one. It's gonna cover mindset and things you can do. Like, it's a great course. Or take the Self-Reliance boot camp, and he's gonna talk about, I think, some mindset stuff there as well. But most importantly, and I go back to this one, is resist. Resist the negative pull. Resist the fear so that you can make the best decision for yourself and find opportunities. And stop panic prepping. Panic prepping doesn't get you anywhere. It makes you buy all the wrong shit with your money, and then you don't have your money for the shit you need, right? Because, yeah, we may be feeling it right now, and we are in a fall. And if you're gonna be ready for what happens after the fall, you need to get through the fall in as best a way you can. And we have everything we need with us right now to do it. We just have to do it, and we have to be willing to go through the hard stuff, because sometimes there's just hard stuff to do. I'm gonna answer some questions now. Question: too many good people don't vote. How do you convince the people they should vote? That's a hard one, because I'm one of the good people who doesn't vote. I will not vote for somebody I do not think should be president of the United States. There is nobody on the ballot who I think should be president of the United States right now. I occasionally vote in my local elections because that has actual meaningful impact. But there is no reason for me to vote. And if more people actually voted for the people they wanted in office, we would have a very different outcome in elections. So to me, that's a non-problem. Question: what about Black Swan event? So there is no election. That could happen. I think that's very, very unlikely. I think there's going to be an election. I don't think that they want to stop the election. If you stop the election, you stop any illusion that this country is a democracy and that we vote people into office. And I don't think that's where we are right now. So, if that were to happen, would you take any action? What's likely to so let's say it does happen. Elections are suspended in November, and I guess Biden steps down and Harris becomes president. I don't know. Like, there's going to be all sorts of gnashing of teeth about dictatorship and that sort of thing. Um, what would the likely outcome on you be if that happened? There would probably be protesting. Um, if there's a big event that happens, we're going to be dealing with the event. But what do you do to get ready for that? The same things you get ready to do with if either one wins, I think. It's the same thing. Question: do you think Trump is truly for the American people? I don't think anybody who's made it through the political system long enough to make it to a presidential caliber candidate is in it for the American people. I think they are in it to win it at that point. That's how our system works. They are so beholden to all of the things that they have to be beholden to. It's like the nature of how the system is set up. And the people who are in it for the American people aren't the ones winning the elections. That's actually a lot of why I don't bother voting. So there we go. Anyway, that is the end of today's show. I do want to mention I have started, just so you know, if you didn't read the Monday meal, I've started a new relationship with Vivor, and I have an affiliate arrangement with them, and I've started doing reviews as a result of that. And my first review was a coffee grinder. You know why? Because y'all always ask me, which coffee grinder should I buy? And I'm like, you should get a burr grinder, but I have a commercial burr grinder. And so I just use that. I got the burr grinder that Vivor has, and I put it through its paces, and I made a review video, and that's at livingfreeintennessee.com if you want to check it out. There are a lot of good things about it, and one tricky thing about it. Like the only negative things I'd have to say about it is like every grinder, it just makes a mess. Like when the coffee makes a mess, it is what it is. Um, and it's really cool. Like you can pull. It has like so the burr. It's a conical burr, so it has two an outer loop and an inner loop turning. And that inner loop, the upper burr comes out, and you can really get down in there and clean. And I really like that about it because my biggest complaint about a lot of grinders I've tested is I can't clean between the burrs all the way, and that one you can. But when you put that top burr back in, you need to align it just right. There's some little tabs that go into little slots for tabs, or it sits too high, and you can put the whole thing back together. And then when you dial what grind level you want, you'll only get a coarse grind. But if you seat it properly, it works great. So that's over at livingfreeintennessee.com. Check that out. And if you decide to buy one, just know I do get a small commission on that. I'm going to start doing not just Vivor products, but other product reviews again. I used to do that and I stopped. And I'm going to just start talking about some of the things that we use here that I find really useful. Anyway, if you like the show and want to support the work I'm doing here, don't forget to get your coffee at hollerroast.com. And also think about becoming a member. Find out more about that at livingfreeintennessee.com. With that, guys, go out, make it a great week.